As Ranking Member Lucas for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And listening to those last responses, I'll turn to you, Dr. Stilwell. As a former air traffic controller, let's talk about whether we adopt for the space sector the air traffic control model to emulate or the maritime domain. Expand on, if you would, as being valuable to study, I guess is the way I should word that.
I'm happy to. So there's significant differences between air traffic control and the concepts of space traffic management, the most significant of which is that air traffic control is predicated on a single entity having authority over a physical volume of airspace. And that does not exist in the space domain. That brings rise to the maritime comparisons, where there are multiple authorities responsible for operators within the domain. So there are issues in air traffic control that are very useful and very instructive, and that is particularly in the way that international standards are reached through the ICAO process. That without reaching new treaties or new agreements, new technical standards can be adopted by the world. And what we see in the ICAO process, which I would like to note, is seeks consensus, but is not a consensus-based process. It is an industry expert-driven process to reach standards that can be implemented by all nations in the world. And what we see is that when ICAO is able to develop guidance material, it is adopted because that material is valuable. It saves each individual country from trying to develop their own standards. So the value occurs long before we reach an enforceable standard and at the guidance material level. So if we use that model, bringing in the industry expertise to develop what starts as guidance material and evolves into a standard, we get a jump start on the process for reaching those international agreements. For us to develop behaviors in space that are applicable only in the U.S. or only in the U.S. or Western Hemisphere countries doesn't get us where we need to go in terms of space situational awareness and space safety. So there are instructive models, but it is not a plug and play. We cannot say, let's do what we do with air traffic control, because the environment in the governments is dramatically different.
Several witnesses, Dr. Stilwell, discussed the challenges that DoD faced upgrading their SSA systems and software. And despite considerable taxpayer funding in many years, they're still using the same system. Your testimony highlights how the private sector is much more innovative and can adopt new challenges more quickly. How could a distributed governance model for space situational awareness allow operators of space assets to become customers of data rather than simply users of data? And please elaborate on the importance of this difference as it pertains to innovation and the burden on the taxpayers, I would note.
It's quite important because the Stratcom is very competent at fulfilling their mission, which is to protect U.S. assets in space. And they develop their systems to do that. The ancillary benefit to the space community of providing conjunction alerts is an additional service that's provided, and it's not intended to be tailored to meet a specific satellite operator's needs. Nor should it be. As you mentioned, the taxpayers have no obligation to fund specifically tailored services. By dividing the two elements, the space situational awareness, where the infrastructure of data about the location and trajectory of objects in space, and the conjunction alerting services into two separate functions, we have the ability to use the infrastructure as a joint use infrastructure, as the same as we do with radars and navigational aids on the terrestrial domain, and allow the industry to use that data to develop more bespoke tools. You become a customer when you are paying for a service. There's a high cost to a free service, and the industry is experiencing that high cost in their cost of evaluating hundreds of thousands of conjunction alerts. If we allow a healthy, competitive industry to develop in this layer between the operator and the infrastructure, then there is an opportunity to innovate quickly. And in a competitive environment, there is an incentive to invest in the analytics to provide more precise information to those customers. There's not an incentive for government to invest in that because it is not the priority under the current model. The priority under the current model is to protect U.S. space assets in space, and Stratcom does that very well.
Continuing with you, Doctor, in your opinion, are the problems of orbital debris, space situational awareness, and space traffic management, would you describe them as data issues or behavioral issues? And as you think about that, I guess I would ask, are most operators good actors?
It's a combination of the two. Better data gives you better information so that you can make better decisions. So the question of whether it is a data issue or a behavior issue is not, they're not divorced partners. Your behavior is based on the data that you have available. However, in the question of good actors, you can only be a good actor if you have rules to follow. We can't expect someone to comply with a rule that doesn't exist. So when it comes to particularly a conjunction between two maneuverable satellites, who executes the maneuver is important because there's an economic cost to executing that maneuver. It reduces your emission life of the satellite, and companies should not be expected to be altruistic in being good actors. They should be expected to follow the rules. However, without any rules, it comes down to a negotiation, and we should not expect two commercial enterprises to ask each other to sacrifice their viability in the absence of any structure. In both the maritime and aviation domains, we have right-of-way, and that answers that question for you. So the fact that you're a good actor does not negate the need for good rules, which we do not have.
Thank you, Doctor. And my time has expired, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Lucas. The chair recognizes Mr. Byer for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and thank all of you for being here today. This is my 6th year